There is a photograph that almost nobody outside of Romania has ever seen. It was taken on the 25th of December, 1989. The man in the photograph is wearing a heavy black overcoat. His hands are tied behind his back with a piece of dirty rope. His face is bruised. His eyes are wet. And behind him, there is a brick wall, pockmarked from the bullets that have already passed through his body. That man, 3 days earlier, was the absolute ruler of a country of 23 million people. 3 days earlier, he had a private zoo. He had 11 palaces. He had a personal cobbler who flew with him to make new shoes whenever the old ones got dirty. He had a wife who insisted that every scientist in the country call her doctor, even though she could barely read. 3 days later, he was a corpse against a wall behind a toilet block in a provincial army barracks. And the soldiers who shot him were so eager to do it that they started firing before the order was given. I am Mortimer Quill. Welcome back to the archive. Tonight, I want to show you something that history textbooks almost never show you. They love to tell you how dictators rise. They love the rallies. They love the speeches. They love the saluting crowds and the parades with the missiles. But the moment a tyrant starts to fall, the textbooks get suddenly very polite. They use phrases like was overthrown or passed away in custody. They tell you the man died. They never tell you how. And the how is the only part that matters. Because here's the truth that I have spent 20 years pulling out of declassified files, court transcripts, eyewitness reports, and the memoirs of the people who were actually in the room. The truth is this: the men who built empires of fear, who put their faces on coins and stamps and the front pages of every newspaper, who told their citizens they were demigods, geniuses, fathers of the nation, eternal leaders. These men, almost without exception, died like cowards. They hid in holes. They wore women's coats. They begged strangers for water. They asked, with tears in their eyes, the same question that their victims had been asking them for decades. What did I ever do to you? I have 6 folders in front of me tonight. 6 manila folders, each one labeled in faded black ink, sitting inside the iron safe behind me. The label on the safe reads, in English, Coward's End. I unlocked it 20 minutes before we started recording. I want you to look at the folders with me. I want you to sit on the other side of this desk, in your usual chair, the one you always sit in, and stay quiet, the way you always do, and listen. Folder 1, Romania. Folder 2, Italy. Folder 3, Iraq. Folder 4, Libya. Folder 5, Cambodia. Folder 6, Japan. 6 men. 6 final hours. None of them ended the way the statues said they would. Stay with me. Don't get up. There is a coin on the desk between us. A small bronze coin with a double-headed eagle pressed into it. We will get to the coin at the end. You will want to know what it means. Let us open the first folder. The man's name was Nicolae Ceaușescu. He had ruled Romania since 1965. By the late 1980s, he had built a personality cult so extreme that visiting foreign diplomats would sometimes laugh out loud at it, then go home and write embarrassed cables about what they had witnessed. He called himself the genius of the Carpathians, the Danube of thought, the architect of the new Romania. State television was required, by law, to mention his name a minimum number of times per broadcast. His birthday was a national holiday. His wife, Elena, a woman who had finished only 4 years of school and could barely sign her own name, was given an honorary doctorate in chemistry and called the Mother of the Nation. Behind the slogans, the country was starving. By 1989, Romania was the worst-fed country in Europe. Bread was rationed. Meat appeared in stores once a month, if at all. Hot water in apartment buildings was turned on for 2 hours per week. People were freezing to death in their own homes during the winter, and the official radio was reporting record agricultural achievements. In December of 1989, the dam broke. It started in a small city in western Romania called Timișoara, where a Hungarian pastor named Laszlo Tokes was being evicted by the secret police, and his parishioners formed a human chain around his apartment to stop them. The protest spread. Within 48 hours, the entire city was in the streets. Ceaușescu, panicking, ordered the army to shoot. They shot. People died. The protest grew anyway. On the 21st of December, Ceaușescu made the worst decision of his life. He decided to give a televised speech from the balcony of the Central Committee building in Bucharest, in front of 100,000 workers who had been bussed in to applaud him. He had given speeches like this his entire career. The script was always the same. He would denounce foreign agents, the crowd would chant his name, the whole thing would be broadcast live to the country as proof of his popularity. This time, 3 minutes into the speech, somebody in the crowd booed. You can find the footage. It is on the internet. Look at his face when he hears that sound. He had not heard that sound in 24 years. He stops mid-sentence. He blinks. He raises his right hand the way he always did, expecting the chanting to start. The chanting does not start. Instead, the booing grows louder. Then there are whistles. Then somebody shouts, "Timișoara!" And then the crowd, his crowd, the crowd that had been bussed in to love him, starts to scream at him. He looks like a man who has just been told that his own children hate him. There is a long, terrible pause. He says weakly, "Hello? Hello?" into the microphone, like a confused old man checking if a telephone still works. Elena, beside him, hisses at him to promise more money. He stammers. He promises a raise of 200 lei per month. The crowd laughs at him. The broadcast is cut. State television goes to a static screen. Inside the building, Ceaușescu's bodyguards start running. Outside the building, the army is starting to switch sides. For the next 19 hours, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu hid inside the Central Committee while the city of Bucharest came apart. By the morning of the 22nd of December, the building was surrounded by protesters. The doors at the bottom were being broken down. The Securitate, the secret police that had terrorized the country for 40 years, was disintegrating. Officers were burning their files in the basement. Some were trying to defect. Some were shooting at random. Ceaușescu did the only thing he could think of. He got on a helicopter, a military helicopter. A Romanian-made Aerospatiale Alouette was waiting on the roof of the Central Committee. The pilot, a man named Vasile Maluțan, had been a loyal regime pilot for years. Ceaușescu, Elena, 2 bodyguards, and a man named Manea Mănescu, the deputy prime minister, climbed in. The helicopter, badly overloaded, lifted off in a panic and headed north. What happened on that helicopter was the moment when Ceaușescu, for the first time in his adult life, was forced to understand that he was no longer in charge of anything. The pilot, Maluțan, knew the army had switched sides. He knew that staying in the air with Ceaușescu on board was, at best, suicide. He pretended that the helicopter was being tracked by anti-aircraft radar. He landed the helicopter in a field beside a road in the countryside, told Ceaușescu they had to abandon the aircraft, and effectively dumped him there. The pilot took off again and never came back. Picture this for a moment. The most powerful man in Romania, the genius of the Carpathians, standing in a muddy field on a cold December afternoon, in a heavy fur hat, with his wife next to him, and 2 bodyguards who are starting to look at each other very nervously. There is no plan. There is no escort. There is no presidential motorcade. There is just a road and a man in his 70s who has not actually walked anywhere unaccompanied in 2 decades. They flagged down a car, a red Dacia. The driver was a doctor on his way home. The doctor recognized them immediately and, at first, refused to drive them anywhere. Then, when one of the bodyguards pointed a pistol at him, he agreed. He drove them a few kilometers, then claimed the engine had broken down. They got out. They flagged down another car. This driver, a man named Nicolae Petrișor, was a bicycle factory mechanic. He recognized them too. He took them to the town of Târgoviște, ostensibly to find safety, but in reality, he was driving them straight to the local police station. By the late afternoon of the 22nd of December, the absolute dictator of Romania, the man whose face had appeared on every wall of every classroom in the country for 24 years, was sitting in the back room of an army barracks in a small provincial town, eating a piece of stale bread, watched over by soldiers who were openly arguing with each other about whether he should be killed immediately or only after a trial. For 3 days, the Ceaușescus were held in that barracks. The country was in chaos. There was shooting in the streets of Bucharest. Nobody was sure who was loyal to the new government and who was still loyal to the old one. The new authorities, a group calling itself the National Salvation Front, made a decision that haunts Romania to this day. They decided that the easiest way to end the chaos was to put Nicolae and Elena on trial immediately, find them guilty, and execute them publicly, so that no Securitate officer anywhere in the country would have any reason to keep fighting. The trial was held on Christmas Day, the 25th of December, 1989. It lasted approximately 1 hour. The judges were 3 military officers. The prosecutor was a man named. The trial was held on Christmas Day, the 25th of December, 1989. It lasted approximately 1 hour. The judges were 3 military officers. The prosecutor was a man named Dan Voinia. The defense lawyer was assigned by the court and, by his own later admission, did almost nothing to actually defend his clients. The charges were genocide, undermining state power, destruction of public property, and undermining the national economy. The Ceaușescus were not allowed to call witnesses. They were not allowed to appeal. The verdict had, in fact, been decided before the trial began. You can watch the trial. Somebody filmed it on a handheld video camera. The footage is grainy, badly lit, and unbearable to watch. Nicolae sits at a small wooden table. He is wearing the same heavy black overcoat he was wearing when he was captured. He looks exhausted. Elena sits beside him, in a dark headscarf, her arms folded across her chest like a stubborn old woman waiting in line at a post office. Throughout the trial, Nicolae refuses to recognize the court. He keeps repeating the same line. __quote _5 __. He says it again and again, like a man hoping that if he repeats the magic formula enough times, the spell will work and he will wake up back in his palace. The judges ignore him. They read out the charges. They read out the verdict. Both Ceaușescus are sentenced to death. When the verdict is announced, Elena loses her composure for the first time. She turns to her husband and says, in a voice loud enough for the camera to pick up, __quote _6 __. That is the line. That is the line that opens every folder I am going to read to you tonight. After everything we did for them. 6 men. 6 languages, 6 decades. The same sentence. After everything we did for them. The soldiers tied their hands behind their backs with rope. They were led out into the courtyard. Elena saw the wall. She saw the firing squad. She started to scream. She kept screaming __quote _7 __. She was screaming at the soldiers. The soldiers were the same age as her own children. They were not listening. The firing squad consisted of 3 paratroopers. Their names are documented: Captain Ionel Borou, Sergeant Major Gorgine Octavian Gheorghiu, and a 3rd soldier whose name was withheld for years. They had volunteered. There had been a long list of volunteers. The officers had to choose. The order to fire was supposed to be given when the Ceaușescus were against the wall. But the soldiers, the moment they saw their targets, opened fire. They emptied their magazines. 7 seconds. Approximately 120 rounds. The cameraman who was supposed to film the execution was still running across the courtyard when the shooting started. The footage that exists shows the bodies already on the ground. Nicolae is on his back, his eyes still open. Elena is face down in the dirt, her headscarf knocked off, her gray hair exposed. The genius of the Carpathians, the father of the nation, lying in a frozen courtyard behind a toilet block in a town that he had probably never visited in his entire reign. That is folder 1. Mortimer Quill closes the first folder. He sets it on the desk between us. He looks at you for a long moment, his eyes calm behind the round wire-frame glasses. He does not blink. 1. 5 to go. Don't get comfortable. Folder 2. Italy, 1945. The man's name was Benito Mussolini. By April of that year, Mussolini had been a falling man for almost 2 years. The real fall had started in July of 1943, when the Grand Council of Fascism, his own people, had voted to remove him from power. The king had him arrested and imprisoned in a hotel high in the Apennine Mountains, on a peak called Gran Sasso, where the Italians believed nobody could possibly reach him. The Germans reached him in September. A daring glider raid by SS commandos under Otto Skorzeny pulled Mussolini out of the hotel and flew him to Hitler. Hitler, embarrassed and angry, set Mussolini up as the puppet leader of a small rump state in northern Italy called the Italian Social Republic, with its capital in a town on Lake Garda called Salo. For the next 18 months, Mussolini was a dictator only on paper. Every important decision was made by the Germans. Every train, every soldier, every shipment of fuel was controlled by Berlin. The man who had once strutted in front of millions in Piazza Venezia spent his evenings writing self-pitying memoirs in a villa on a lake, complaining that the Italian people had betrayed him. By the spring of 1945, the war was clearly lost. The Allies were across the Po Valley. The Germans in Italy were preparing to surrender. The partisans, the armed Italian resistance, controlled most of the countryside in the north. Mussolini, sitting in Salo, finally understood that the Germans were going to abandon him. He started thinking about escape. His plan, such as it was, involved fleeing to Switzerland. He hoped, somehow, to cross the border to negotiate with the Allies, to position himself as a leader of a non-fascist Italian government. None of this was realistic. The Allies had no interest in him. The Swiss had no intention of letting him in. But a falling man rarely makes realistic plans. A falling man clutches at any branch. On the 25th of April, 1945, Mussolini left Milan in a small convoy. With him were his mistress, Clara Petacci, a woman more than 30 years his junior, who had refused to leave him even when he begged her to save herself. With him were several of his most loyal ministers. With him was a small German military escort. The convoy headed north, toward the lakes, toward the Swiss border. They did not get far. The roads were swarming with partisans. At a small village on the western shore of Lake Como, called Musso, the convoy was stopped at a partisan checkpoint. The Germans negotiated. The partisans agreed to let the German vehicles pass through, on the condition that they could search them for Italian fascists. The Germans, who had no interest in dying from Mussolini at this point, agreed. Mussolini, in a panic, did the thing that has defined his ending in every history book since. He took off his familiar uniform. He took off the famous black shirt and the polished riding boots and the cap with the eagle. He put on a German Luftwaffe overcoat. He put on a German helmet. He pulled the helmet down low over his eyes. He climbed into the back of a German truck and pretended to be a sleeping German soldier. A partisan, a young man named Giuseppe Negri, boarded the truck to inspect it. He saw a soldier in a Luftwaffe coat slumped against the side, helmet down, as if drunk or asleep. Something about the man bothered him. The face was wrong, the chin. He pushed the helmet up. He recognized Mussolini instantly. Every Italian alive had seen that face on 1,000 posters, on every wall, in every newsreel for 23 years. The bald head, the heavy jaw, the dark, tired eyes. Negri stepped back. He turned to his commander. He said, in Italian, quote 8, "The big one, il pezzo grosso." That is what Mussolini was called by the man who arrested him. Not Duce, not Excellency, not the founder of the empire. The big one. As if he were a fish, Mussolini was taken off the truck. He did not resist. The man who had ranted from balconies for 2 decades, who had told Italians that fascism was a doctrine of will and courage, who had sent boys to die in Ethiopia and Greece and Russia, climbed down from the truck silently, in a foreign uniform, and let himself be led to a small farmhouse in the village of Dongo. Clara Petacci was found shortly afterward and taken with him. That night, Mussolini and Petacci were moved several times for security. By the morning of the 28th of April, The partisan command in Milan had made a decision. Mussolini was to be executed immediately, before the Allies arrived and demanded he be handed over for a public trial. The Italians wanted to handle this themselves. A man arrived from Milan with the order. His name was Walter Audizio, but he was using the cover name __quote_9___. He drove up to the farmhouse where Mussolini and Petacci were being held, the home of a peasant family named De Maria. He told the guards he was there to rescue them. Mussolini believed him. Mussolini got into the car. Audizio drove a short distance down the road to a place called Giulino di Mezzegra, beside the gate of a private villa. He ordered Mussolini and Petacci out of the car. He told them to stand against the iron gate. He raised a submachine gun. There are conflicting accounts of what Mussolini said in those final seconds. Some say he opened his coat and shouted, quote, 10. Some say he stood in shocked silence. Some say Petacci threw herself in front of him and was hit first. What is not in dispute is what happened next. Audizio fired. Mussolini and Petacci fell. They were dead within seconds. But the story does not end there. The story does not even begin until the next day. On the 29th of April, the bodies of Mussolini, Petacci, and several other captured fascist leaders were loaded into a truck and driven to Milan. They were dumped in the Piazzale Loreto, a public square that, the year before, had been the site of a notorious atrocity in which 15 Italian partisans had been executed by fascists and left on display for days. The partisans now did the same to Mussolini. The crowd, which had gathered overnight, was enormous. Thousands of Milanese citizens, many of whom had cheered Mussolini in that same square in past decades, kicked and spat on the bodies. Somebody fired a pistol into Mussolini's corpse. Somebody else urinated on it. The bodies were hauled up by their feet and hung upside down from the metal awning of an Esso gas station at the edge of the square. There is a famous photograph. You have probably seen it without knowing the context. A row of bodies hanging upside down, like animal carcasses in a butcher's shop. Mussolini in the middle, his face purple, his mouth open. Petacci beside him, somebody having tied a piece of rope between her knees so that her skirt would not fall over her face. The crowd below, pointing, laughing, screaming. The Lion of Italy, the founder of the empire, the man who had told an entire nation that he was the inheritor of the Caesars. Hanging upside down at a gas station, with his mistress beside him, in front of a crowd that had once lined up to kiss his hand. Folder 2. Mortimer Quill closes it slowly. He places it on top of folder 1. He reaches for a glass of water on the desk, drinks, sets it back down with deliberate care. The Duce, the Lion of Italy, caught in a woman's coat, hanged at a gas station. 2 folders down. Don't get up. Folder 3, Iraq, December 2003. Saddam Hussein had been the president of Iraq since 1979, although in practice, he had been the real power in the country for almost a decade before that. By the early 2000s, he had built one of the most extravagantly self-glorifying personality cults in modern history. There were palaces in every province, more than 70 of them, many of which he had never visited. There were massive bronze statues of him on horseback, crossed sabers in giant hands modeled after his own, official portraits of him in every conceivable costume. Saddam as a Bedouin warrior, Saddam as a businessman, Saddam as a gentleman farmer, Saddam in a Tyrolean hunting hat, Saddam in a fedora, smoking a cigar like a Hollywood gangster. When the United States invaded Iraq in March of 2003, the regime collapsed almost immediately. The American advance to Baghdad took 3 weeks. The famous statue of Saddam in Firdaus Square was pulled down by a U.S. Marine recovery vehicle on the 9th of April in front of a small crowd of Iraqis and a much larger crowd of journalists. By that day, Saddam himself had vanished. For 8 months, he was the most wanted man on earth. The United States government printed a deck of playing cards with the faces of 55 most wanted Iraqi officials. Saddam was the ace of spades. There was a $25 million bounty on his head. Every intelligence agency on the planet was looking for him. He had disappeared from Baghdad and seemed simply to have evaporated. He had not evaporated. He had gone home. Saddam Hussein was born in a village called Al-Auja, just outside the city of Tikrit, in the rural farming country of central Iraq, along the banks of the Tigris River. This was his world. These were his people. The Albu Nasir tribe. The boys he had grown up with. The cousins and second cousins and family loyalists who had built his entire security apparatus. Where else does a falling tyrant go but home? For 8 months, Saddam moved between safe houses in and around Tikrit. He was protected by a small circle of family bodyguards. He was constantly moving, sleeping in different houses every few nights, never staying in any one place long enough to be tracked. The Americans knew, in general, that he was probably in the area. They could not find him. The break came in early December of 2003. A man was captured by U.S. forces, a man with deep family ties to Saddam's inner circle. After interrogation, he gave the Americans a name, the name of a farmer outside Al-Dar, a small village just south of Tikrit. The farmer was named Qais Namik al-Nadi. He was, allegedly, the man currently hiding Saddam. On the night of the 13th of December, 2003, the United States Army 4th Infantry Division and members of Task Force 121 launched an operation called Red Dawn. 600 soldiers cordoned off 2 adjacent farms outside Al-Dawr. Helicopters circled. Soldiers swept the buildings room by room. They found nothing. No Saddam, no bodyguards, empty rooms, a pile of clothes, a few $1,000s in American currency. The commanding officer, Colonel James Hickey, ordered a second sweep. This time, the soldiers looked at the ground. Behind one of the farmhouses, between the kitchen and a small shed, there was a patch of dirt that did not look right. The soil was disturbed. There were drag marks. A soldier, a sergeant, kicked at the dirt with his boot. He felt something hard underneath. A rope. He pulled the rope. A piece of styrofoam covered in dirt came up. Underneath the styrofoam was a wooden plank. Underneath the plank was a hole. The hole was approximately 2 meters deep. It was barely wide enough for a single person to lie down in. There was a small ventilation pipe. There was a fan powered by a car battery. At the bottom of the hole, lying flat on his back, was a man. He had a long, gray, matted beard. His hair was wild and uncombed. His clothes were filthy. He smelled, by the soldiers' later accounts, like a man who had not bathed in weeks. He was holding a pistol. The pistol was loaded. He did not fire it. Think about that for a moment. The man who, 8 months earlier, had ruled 25 million people. The man who had executed family members for showing insufficient loyalty. The man whose sons had run torture chambers in the basement of every police station in the country. The man whose army had used chemical weapons against Kurdish villages, killing thousands of women and children in single afternoons. The man who had, repeatedly, in his own televised speeches, told the Iraqi people that he would die a martyr's death rather than be captured. This man, when the lid of his hiding hole was lifted off and an American soldier pointed a rifle at his face, raised both hands and said, in English, "I am Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq. I want to negotiate." He had a loaded pistol in his hand. He did not raise it. He did not fire it. He did not turn it on himself. The soldier on top of the hole, a sergeant named Samir, who happened to be an Arabic-speaking Iraqi-American, replied with a sentence that has, since, become quietly famous in military circles. He said, "President Bush sends his regards." Saddam was pulled out of the hole. The famous footage of him, with the long beard, the wild hair, the dirt on his face, being examined by an American military doctor with a wooden tongue depressor, was filmed within hours. The world saw it the next day. The Lion of Baghdad, the Sword of the Arabs, pulled from a hole in the ground behind a farmhouse by men who had been chasing him with playing cards in their pockets. He was tried. The trial took 3 years. It was a real trial, with defense lawyers, with evidence, with cross-examination, although the procedural quality of it was disputed by international observers throughout. He was convicted of crimes against humanity, specifically the kill in a black overcoat, being walked to the gallows. The witnesses are taunting him. They are shouting Shia religious slogans at him. They are mocking him. He is responding, but his words are nearly drowned out by the chanting. The hood is placed over his head. The trapdoor opens. The video ends. Folder 3. Mortimer Quill closes it. He stacks it on the others. 3 folders in a small tower on the desk. He had a loaded pistol. He could have ended it on his own terms. He raised his hands instead. The Lion of Baghdad, in a hole. With a pistol he was too afraid to use. 3 down, 3 to go. Stay seated. Folder 4. Libya, October 2011. Muammar Gaddafi had ruled Libya for 42 years. He had taken power in 1969 in a bloodless coup against an aging king when he was a 27-year-old army captain. By 2011, he was 69 years old. He had outlasted 9 American presidents. He had outlasted the entire Cold War. He had survived multiple assassination attempts, multiple American bombings, decades of international sanctions, and the diplomatic isolation of his own country. He had paid for and personally directed the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988, killing 270 people, including 189 Americans, mostly college students flying home for Christmas. Gaddafi had built, over 4 decades, one of the most theatrical regimes in modern history. He lived, on principle, in a Bedouin tent rather than a palace, although the tent was usually pitched on the grounds of a heavily fortified compound called Bab al-Azizia. He traveled with a personal bodyguard unit composed entirely of women, hand-selected, trained as soldiers. He dressed, depending on the day, in elaborate military uniforms with custom-designed medals, or in flowing African robes, or in shimmering silk shirts unbuttoned to the chest. He had written a book, the Green Book, which he had distributed to every household in Libya, and which combined incoherent political philosophy with personal grievances against his enemies. He called himself the Brother Leader, the King of Kings of Africa, the Dean of Arab rulers, the Imam of all Muslims, the guide of the 1st of September Great Revolution. In February of 2011, the Arab Spring reached Libya. Protests began in Benghazi, the country's second city, which had always been hostile to Gaddafi. The protests turned into an armed uprising within days. By the end of February, eastern Libya was in open rebellion. Gaddafi made a televised speech, the now famous speech, in which he announced, with bulging eyes and a quavering voice, that he would hunt down the protesters, that he would purify Libya, that he would die a martyr in his country. The international community, fearing a massacre in Benghazi, voted at the United Nations Security Council to authorize a no-fly zone. NATO began air operations against Libyan forces in March. Over the next 7 months, the rebels, with NATO air support, slowly pushed Gaddafi's forces back. Tripoli, the capital, fell in August. Gaddafi vanished. For 2 months, Gaddafi hid. He moved, like Saddam, between safe houses and family compounds. He moved, eventually, back to the city of his birth, Sirte. A coastal city on the Mediterranean, halfway between Tripoli and Benghazi, the heartland of his own tribe, the Kadadva. By October, Sirte was the last city in Libya still under his control. NATO and the rebels were closing in. On the 20th of October 2011, Gaddafi made his final decision. He decided to flee Sirte and try to reach the desert south, where he believed he could regroup with loyalist tribes and continue resistance. He gathered a convoy, approximately 75 vehicles, several hundred fighters, his son Mutassim, a handful of personal aides. He left Sirte at dawn. The convoy got 2 kilometers. A French Air Force jet, flying a NATO patrol, spotted the convoy. NATO had standing orders to attack any military formation attempting to break out of Sirte. The jet attacked. American Predator drones, also patrolling the area, joined the attack. Multiple vehicles were destroyed in the first minutes. the convoy scattered. Gaddafi, who had been riding in an armored Toyota Land Cruiser, survived the initial strike. His vehicle, damaged, pulled off the road. He and a small group of bodyguards, perhaps a dozen men, abandoned the vehicle and ran. They ran across an empty stretch of desert highway in the direction of a small farm complex, looking for cover. Rebel fighters, alerted to the strike, were already converging from multiple directions. Gaddafi and his bodyguards reached the edge of the farm. There was a road. Underneath the road, there was a pair of large concrete drainage culverts, the kind that allow flash floodwater to pass under a highway in a desert region. The pipes were perhaps 1.5 meters in diameter, empty, dry, a hiding place. The brother leader, the king of kings of Africa, the imam of all Muslims, climbed into a drainage pipe. Mortimer Quill pauses, looks at you. A drainage pipe. The man who had ridden through Tripoli on a white horse, in robes embroidered with the map of Africa, who had hand-selected 40 virgin bodyguards, who had told the United Nations General Assembly that the entire institution was a terrorist conspiracy, crawled into a concrete pipe under a highway and waited in the dark. The rebels found him within minutes. They had been tracking the survivors of the convoy, following their footprints across the desert. A young fighter, a man named Mohammed al-Bibi, 20 years old, peered into the drainage pipe and saw a figure crouched at the back. He shouted. Gaddafi crawled out, on his hands and knees, into the bright Mediterranean sunlight. He was wounded. He had been hit by shrapnel in the chest and the legs during the airstrike. His face was bloody. His famous curly hair was matted with sand and dirt. His robes were torn. He looked, in the footage that exists, less like a king of kings and more like a confused old man pulled from a wreck. The footage exists because dozens of rebels were filming with mobile phones. You can find it. I have watched it more times than I want to admit. Gaddafi is dragged from the pipe. He is ekhanging everything. You know that being action from the pipe. He is bleeding from a head wound. He is confused. He keeps asking the same question over and over in Arabic, in a voice that is barely above a whisper. What did I do to you? What is happening? Do you know right from wrong? The brother leader, who had ordered the massacre at Abu Salim prison in 1996, in which more than 1,200 political prisoners were machine-gunned in a courtyard in a single afternoon. The man whose intelligence services had hunted Libyan dissidents in apartments across Europe for 40 years. The man who had personally signed the order to bomb a passenger jet over Scotland. What did I do to you? The rebels did not answer his question. They beat him. They dragged him by his hair across the dirt. One of them, in the footage, can be seen pushing the barrel of a bayonet between Gaddafi's legs. Another fires a pistol into the air, screaming. They threw him on the hood of a pickup truck and drove him toward the city, the crowd around the truck growing with each block. He died somewhere between the drainage pipe and the city of Misrata, an hour to the west, where his body was eventually delivered. The exact circumstances of his death have never been fully clarified. He was shot in the head at some point during the journey. Whether by a single fighter, in revenge, or in the chaos of the mob, no investigation has ever conclusively established. The Libyan transitional government, embarrassed by the brutality of the footage, announced that he had been killed in crossfire. Almost no one believed this. His body and the body of his son Mu'tasim were taken to Misrata. They were not buried. They were placed inside the cold storage room of a commercial meat market in a shopping district of the city. For 4 days, ordinary Libyans lined up by the thousands to walk past the body, to photograph it, to spit on it, to verify with their own eyes that the man who had ruled them for 42 years was actually dead. The King of Kings of Africa, in a meat locker, behind a butcher's shop, with a queue of citizens taking selfies beside his corpse. Folder 4. Mortimer Quill closes it. He sets it on the stack. 4 folders. He pauses. He does not look at you immediately. He looks at the wall behind you, at something only he can see. When he speaks, his voice is lower than it has been all evening. Stop. Listen to me. I need you to do something difficult right now. I need you to feel something honestly. You watched those 4 men die, and somewhere in your chest, something felt good about it. Don't lie to yourself. The Romanian Wall, the gas station in Milan, the hole outside Tikrit, the drainage pipe in Sirte. You wanted them to fall. The world wanted them to fall. When the bodies were displayed, the crowds cheered, and you would have cheered with them. I understand. I am not judging you. The rage was earned. But I want you to notice something. 4 tyrants are gone. The world that produced them is not. Romania today has new oligarchs. Italy today has new demagogues. Iraq today has new militias and new strongmen. Libya today is a failed state, broken into rival warlord territories, and ordinary Libyans now speak, quietly, of the time of Gaddafi as a time when at least the lights were on. The crown does not get destroyed when the king is killed. The crown rolls across the floor and somebody else picks it up. Hold that thought for the next 2 folders. They are different. They will hurt differently. Folder 5, Cambodia. April 1998. There is no man in 20th century history who got away with more and answered for less than Saloth Sar. You probably know him by his nom de guerre, Pol Pot. Between April 1975 and January 1979, Pol Pot ruled a country of approximately 8 million people. In those 3 years and 8 months, his regime, the Khmer Rouge, killed approximately 1.7 to 2.2 million Cambodians. That is roughly 1 in 4 citizens of the entire country dead in less than 4 years. It is, proportionally, one of the most concentrated genocides in human history. The killings were not the byproduct of war. They were the policy. Pol Pot believed that Cambodia could be transformed into a pure agrarian communist society in a single generation by emptying the cities, abolishing money, abolishing schools, abolishing religion, and forcing the entire population into rural communes. Anyone who resisted, anyone who looked educated, anyone who wore glasses, anyone who could speak a foreign language, anyone whose hands were too soft to belong to a peasant, was killed. The killing fields outside Phnom Penh, where mass graves still hold tens of thousands of skulls, are a literal place. They are not a metaphor. In 1979, the Vietnamese army invaded Cambodia and overthrew the Khmer Rouge regime in a matter of weeks. Pol Pot did not stand and fight. Pol Pot fled into the jungle, to the Thai border, where for the next 19 years, he and the remnants of his army lived in a network of guerrilla camps in the mountains. The Khmer Rouge continued, throughout the 1980s, to be recognized at the United Nations as the legitimate government of Cambodia, partly because the Cold War rivalry between China and Vietnam meant that Western powers, including the United States, supported the Khmer Rouge as a counterweight to Vietnamese influence. Pol Pot, the man who had killed 2 million people, lived for 2 decades in a guerrilla camp called En Long Veng, a few kilometers from the Thai border, surrounded by jungle and his loyal personal bodyguard. He read books. He listened to the BBC. He watched videos of his own old propaganda films. He gave occasional interviews to the few foreign journalists who could reach him. He never apologized. He never expressed any guilt. In his last public interview, given to the American journalist Nate Thayer in October 1997, just months before his death, Pol Pot was asked directly about the killings. He smiled. He said calmly, quote, "By the time of that interview, Pol Pot was already a prisoner of his own movement. The Khmer Rouge, by 1997, was disintegrating. The guerrilla army, after 20 years in the jungle, was tired. Soldiers were defecting. Foreign aid had dried up after the end of the Cold War. The remaining commanders were looking for ways to negotiate amnesties with the Cambodian government. Pol Pot, in his isolation, made a series of paranoid decisions that destroyed the last loyalty of his own people. He ordered the execution of his longtime defense minister, Sun Sen, along with Sun Sen's entire family, including children, in June 1997. The other Khmer Rouge commanders, watching this, decided that Pol Pot had become a threat to all of them. A man named Ta Mok, known by the nickname The Butcher for his role in past purges, organized a coup. Pol Pot was arrested by his own bodyguards. He was put on trial by the Khmer Rouge in a clearing in the jungle, under a tarpaulin tent, with 20 members of the cadre as judges. You can find the footage of this trial. Nate Thayer filmed it. Pol Pot is sitting on a wooden chair, in plain, dark clothes, leaning on a bamboo cane. His face is thin. He is 72 years old. He looks not like a tyrant, but like a tired old grandfather, slightly confused about why so many young people are shouting at him. The cadre denounce him for the murder of Son Sen. They sentence him to lifelong house arrest. He says nothing. He is led away to a small wooden hut. Read that again, because it matters. The Khmer Rouge, the people who actually carried out the genocide, the people whose hands were physically covered in the blood of their countrymen, when they finally put their leader on trial, charged him with one count of murder, the murder of one of their own. 2 million dead Cambodians did not appear in the indictment, not as a charge, not as a footnote. For the next 10 months, Pol Pot lived under house arrest in a wooden hut in An Long Veng. He was guarded by young soldiers, the same age as the children his policies had orphaned 20 years earlier. He was given rice. He was given a thin mattress on the floor. He listened to Voice of America on a small radio. He continued, according to the few visitors he received, to insist that he had done nothing wrong. In April 1998, the situation changed. The remaining Khmer Rouge commanders had finally begun negotiations with the Cambodian government for amnesty. As part of those negotiations, the government wanted Pol Pot. Specifically, they wanted to extradite him to face an international tribunal for crimes against humanity. The Khmer Rouge commanders agreed in principle. The handover was scheduled for late April. On the night of the 15th of April, 1998, Pol Pot was lying on his thin mattress in the wooden hut. He had been told that morning that he was about to be handed over to the Cambodian government and then to the International Tribunal. According to his wife, who was in the hut with him, he listened to the BBC News that evening, the report that announced his impending capture. He went to bed early. At 10:30 p.m., his wife heard him gasp. She called the guards. By the time they entered the hut, his heart had stopped. He was 72 years old. The official cause of death, recorded by a Khmer Rouge medic with no formal training, was heart failure. There has been speculation, never confirmed, that he committed suicide with cyanide rather than face trial. There has been speculation, also never confirmed, that the Khmer Rouge poisoned him to prevent him from naming his old comrades in court. Neither has ever been proven. His body was burned 2 days later on a pyre of car tires in the jungle clearing behind the hut. The smell of burning rubber, by all accounts of the witnesses, was overwhelming. He died in his sleep, on a mattress. After a quiet evening listening to the radio, Mortimer Quill stops. He places folder 5 on the stack very, very gently, as if it is heavier than the others. He looks at you. His face is hard. 2 million people. Most of them died of starvation, of exhaustion, of beatings, of bullets in the back of the head over open pits in the rice fields. They died screaming. They died begging for water. They died watching their children die first. Pol Pot died in his sleep, on a mattress, listening to the radio. This is the folder I cannot close calmly. This is the one that breaks the pattern. The other tyrants got something resembling consequence. A wall, a gas station, a hole, a pipe. Pol Pot got a quiet death and a fire of car tires. The universe owed 2 million Cambodians a reckoning, and the universe defaulted on the dead. I want you to sit with that. I want you to feel how unfair it is. Because the next folder is the opposite. Folder 6, Japan, September 1945. The man's name was Hideki Tojo. He had been the Prime Minister of Japan from October 1941 until July 1944. He had personally authorized the attack on Pearl Harbor. He had presided over the Japanese military's expansion across the Pacific, a campaign that involved the systematic enslavement of Asian populations, the mass killing of Chinese civilians, the establishment of a network of so-called comfort stations in which tens of thousands of women were trafficked as sexual slaves for the Imperial Army, and the conduct of medical experiments on living prisoners by Unit 731 in occupied Manchuria. He had also, in Japanese law, been the chief political authority responsible for ordering soldiers to die rather than surrender, a doctrine that had killed hundreds of thousands of his own men by the time the war ended. By September of 1945, Japan had surrendered. American troops were occupying Tokyo. General Douglas MacArthur was in command. The Allies had drawn up a list of major war criminals to be arrested and tried at what would become the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, the Tokyo Trial. Tojo was at the top of the list. On the 11th of September, 1945, an American military arrest detail arrived at Tojo's modest home in the Setagaya district of Tokyo. They had a warrant. They knocked on the door. The Japanese servants admitted them politely. The American officer in charge, a major named Paul Kraus, asked for Tojo. Tojo appeared at an upstairs window, looked down at the soldiers in the garden, and asked them to wait a moment. The soldiers waited. Inside the house, Tojo sat down at his desk. He had a pistol. The pistol was an American-made Colt Model 1903, which he had been given as a gift years earlier by an American military attaché in Tokyo, in the days when relations between the two countries had been peaceful. He had had a doctor visit him days earlier and mark, with a piece of charcoal on his chest, the exact location of his heart. He pressed the barrel of the pistol against the charcoal mark. He pulled the trigger. He missed. The bullet entered his chest. It passed through the left lung. It missed the heart by approximately 3 centimeters. It exited through his back without striking the spine. He did not die. He fell to the floor, bleeding heavily but conscious. The American soldiers, hearing the shot, broke down the door and rushed in. They found Tojo on the floor of his study, bleeding, semi-conscious, the pistol still in his hand. The Japanese tradition in such circumstances would have been to allow a man who had attempted ritual suicide to complete the act. The Americans had no such tradition. They called for a military doctor. The doctor, an American, performed an emergency battlefield procedure, administered a blood transfusion using American blood, and stabilized Tojo's condition. The blood transfusion is, in itself, a detail that some historians have called perhaps the most ironic single moment in the history of the Pacific War. The man who had ordered the attack on Pearl Harbor was kept alive on a stretcher in his own living room by a pint of American blood pumped into his veins by an American Army doctor. He survived. He recovered, slowly, in an American military hospital. By December 1945, 3 months after his failed suicide, he was healthy enough to be transferred to Sugamo prison to await trial. The Tokyo trial began in May 1946. It lasted 2.5 years. Tojo, in court, behaved very differently from the man who had pressed a pistol to his chest. He defended his actions. He took full responsibility for the war as a matter of personal honor, and in doing so, deliberately shielded the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, from prosecution, which had been a strategic decision agreed in advance with the American occupation authorities. He gave long, articulate testimonies in which he argued that Japan had been forced into war by Western economic pressure. He did not apologize for the conduct of his armies. He did not acknowledge the comfort women. He did not acknowledge Unit 731. He maintained a bureaucratic, even pedantic dignity throughout the proceedings. He was found guilty on multiple counts of crimes against peace, conventional war crimes, and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence was carried out at Sugamo Prison in Tokyo at 0 hour 2 minutes on the 23rd of December, 1948. He was 63 years old. This is the folder that, on the surface, looks the most just. He attempted to escape consequence. He failed. He stood trial. He was convicted. He was hanged. The system worked the way the system is supposed to work, exactly once, in the lineup I have shown you tonight. But notice what stands at the center of this folder. The man who, by his own culture's code, should have died by his own hand on the day the Americans came for him, missed his own heart by 3 centimeters. He had marked the spot with charcoal. He had a doctor visit him to make sure he knew where it was. And still, when the moment came, his hand wavered. He flinched. The bullet went wide. The man who had told a generation of young Japanese soldiers to die for the emperor, to never surrender, to choose death before captivity, could not, when the moment of his own death came, hold the pistol steady. Folder 6. Mortimer Quill closes it. He stacks it on the others. The tower of 6 folders is now complete. He pushes the stack, with the fingers of one hand, slowly, back across the desk and into the open mouth of the iron safe behind him. He lifts the heavy door. He swings it shut. The latch clicks. He sits back down. He does not speak for a long moment. So, 6 men, 6 final hours. Let me tell you what these folders, taken together, have taught me. 20 years I have been pulling them out and reading them. 20 years. The first lesson is the obvious one. Power is not what tyrants told you it was. The man behind the uniform is always smaller than the myth. Always. Every single one of them, when the soldiers came, became someone they did not want their own posters to show. A confused old man on a balcony saying, quote, 19, quote. A bald dictator hiding under a Luftwaffe coat. A bearded fugitive in a hole with a pistol he was too scared to fire. A revolutionary in a drain pipe asking, quote, 20, quote. An old man on a thin mattress, list, hanged after a flawed trial that satisfied nobody and was conducted by a regime that has since produced its own atrocities. Gaddafi was beaten to death by a mob in a country that has been a failed state ever since. Mussolini's body was hung at a gas station, and within a generation, Italy had voted neo-fascists back into parliament. The wall in Târgoviște did not bring down the Securitate. The Securitate simply rebranded. The crown does not die when the king dies. The crown is picked up by somebody else. And the third lesson is the one I want you to take with you tonight. It is not a comforting lesson. I am sorry. Tyrants are not anomalies. They are not freaks. They are not aliens from a distant planet of evil who land in a country and ruin it. Tyrants are products of the populations that produce them. Every man whose folder I have read tonight was elected, or supported, or tolerated, or cheered by millions of his own countrymen for years, sometimes decades, before any of them turned against him. The Romanians applauded Ceaușescu. The Italians cheered for Mussolini. The Iraqis, many of them, voted for Saddam in his rigged elections and meant it. The Libyans, many of them, genuinely believed Gaddafi was the savior of Africa. The Cambodians, many of them, welcomed the Khmer Rouge into Phnom Penh in 1975 with flowers and applause. The Japanese, almost all of them, supported the war until the last possible day. Tyrants do not appear from nowhere. They appear from us, from the same impulses we all carry. The desire for a strong man who will solve everything. The willingness to look away when the trains go to camps we will never visit. The relief, the genuine relief of letting somebody else take the moral weight off our shoulders. The folders are closed now. The safe is locked. But I want you to understand, every generation produces the desire for new tyrants. Every generation has to refuse it, again, with no help from the previous one. You and I have been together for almost an hour now. You have been quiet, the way you always are. I appreciate that. I do not, generally, appreciate company. But you, I appreciate. There is something on the desk between us. You probably noticed it when we sat down. I told you we would get to it at the end. Mortimer Quill picks up the small bronze coin. He turns it in his fingers, slowly, so the light catches the engraving. A double-headed eagle, both heads facing outward, both crowned, both with their beaks slightly open as if calling. This coin is from the archive. I have been giving it out, one at a time, to the people who finish a video with me. Most viewers, I will be honest with you, do not finish. They click away in the first minute. Some last 10, a few last 20. You have been with me the whole way. You have earned the coin. Take it. Go on. Pick it up. There. You feel that? That small coldness against your palm. That is bronze. It was minted originally in 1792 in a city that no longer exists by a mint that was burned down by a king who was guillotined 3 months later. The coin survived. It always survives. It has been in my archive since 1971. I know, because I am the one who put it there. But here's the part I want you to understand, before you put the coin in your pocket and turn off the screen and go back to your evening. This coin, in your hand, is the receipt. For what, you might ask? For tonight. For the hour we just spent together. For the 6 folders. For the things you saw and the things you felt about them. The good feelings, the cruel little satisfactions, the moments where you cheered, in private, for a corpse hanging at a gas station. You felt those. I saw you feel them. The coin is the receipt. You took it. You are now part of the archive. That is how this works. That is how it has always worked. The archive does not exist in a building. The archive does not exist in the safe behind me. The archive exists in the people who agreed to look. Once you have looked, you cannot stop having looked. Once you have taken the coin, you cannot give it back. Don't worry, it is not a curse, it is not a contract, there is no fine print. You can leave whenever you want. You can put down the coin, close this video, and never come back. But you and I both know that you will come back. Not because I asked, because the archive, once you have entered it, becomes the only place where the world makes any sense. I will see you next week. Folder 7 is already on my desk. The label, in faded ink, reads __quote_21_ different folder, different question, same archive. Until then, viewer, good night. Don't lose the coin.